Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Afnan. To start, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little about your work related to poverty?
Sure. So my name is Dr. Afnan Boutrid, and I'm assistant professor at the University of Wollongong in Dubai. And my background in poverty, honestly, my background is in teacher education. But being in teacher education, you come across just working in the schools. And I've worked in schools all over the world. And so just in that capacity, I've been exposed to a lot of issues around poverty.
So, in your experience, what are the main causes of poverty that you can see affecting communities today?
Ooh, that's such a difficult question, but it's a good question. It's a really good one. Okay, so I don't even know where to begin. So how about this? I'll use the US context because that's what I know the best and that's what I've been exposed to. So I was born and raised in the United States. And a lot of times when people hear about the USA, they think it's a very affluent, one of the richest, most powerful nations in the world. And what a lot of people don't realize is that we also have poverty, and it's an important part of society of our society in America. So it is a reality in America. And so for me, I'll just speak kind of like from my own experience, my anecdotal experience. When I first started teaching, I taught in North Carolina, which is where I'm from. Okay, and so when you become a teacher, they tell you, okay, you just go into a classroom and you teach, right? The students are there, and you operate under the assumption that all your students are coming from a house where they have access to food and clean water, and clothing and shoes and the basic necessities. And so they don't really prepare you as a teacher because to teach students that are coming from impoverished communities. And so you just assume that you're going to teach kids like you, right? That grew up the same way that you grew up. And so I remember when I first started teaching, um, I would have students that would come to me like, I'm really hungry. And I'm like, did you not eat breakfast at home? Like, why did you come to school without breakfast? Where's your lunch? And I was so confused. And then they'd be like, no, I don't have food. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have food? And I would ask my fellow colleagues, and they would tell me, Afnan, in America, they have this thing called free and reduced lunch, okay? And so what that means is that students that live in poverty, they have no food at home, okay? So they open their refrigerator, there's nothing inside. And the only time they eat is when they come to school. And so school provides them with a breakfast, like a tiny little breakfast, and they provide them with a lunch. And that's it. So for a lot of the students in my school, the only time they eat is when they come to school, which means on the weekends they don't have food. So they're going quite a long time without food. Um, and so at the first school that I worked at, what they told us is they were like on Fridays, the students would put their book bags outside on the lockers, and then us as teachers would put food inside their bags because we know if they're not coming to school, they're not getting food. Okay. And so that for me was just like this huge wake up call where I didn't realize, like, that was probably my first time to be exposed to poverty in the United States, and just understanding that there are people that don't have access to food, like a basic necessity. And when we would dig deeper, I'd be like, well, why don't their parents just get jobs, right? And then we would find no, their parents were working two, three jobs. And so we would have parents that were working in factories. And so a lot of the students that we had also were undocumented, so they don't have papers. Um, and so the factory can pay them whatever they want. They want to pay them $5. They want to pay them $2. It's, their
Mm.
whatever they give them. So no matter how hard they work or how many hours they work, they'll still never be able to afford food or basic necessities. And so I always just, in my mind, I was like, oh, if you just work hard enough, you wouldn't have to live in poverty. And then I realized, no, that's not the case, right? It's so many people come, and unfortunately other people take advantage of them and their situations, and that regardless of how hard they work, they're still going to live in poverty. And so then I kept thinking, okay, what if education is kind of your way out, right? So the more educated you get, the better off you're going to be, right? In order to remove yourself from poverty. And that is the case, right? So there is a correlation between becoming educated and helping escape poverty. But the issue is that someone coming from poverty has so many other obstacles they have to overcome than a student like me or you that grew up not in poverty, right? And so we're already at such a huge advantage. And so seeing these students coming into the classroom where they're so hungry, they're malnourished, their parents are gone all the time, so because they're working two, three jobs, how are they going to succeed the same way that you're going to succeed, right? And I'll leave you with one last story because it was so powerful for me because I didn't realize this. We had a student who was always sleeping and never did his homework, and it was just a hot mess. And I remember telling, this is when I was student teaching, I asked my mentor teacher, I'm like, what's wrong with this kid? Like, what's going on? So she's like, let's take him aside, let's talk to him. And she was like, sleep at home. Like, why are you sleeping in the classroom? Like, you're supposed to come to the classroom to learn. And the student looks at us, he goes, the issue is my mom works all night in the house and she locks me outside and I can't sleep outside. I'm too scared because there's like gang violence and that type of thing. Okay, so it turns out his mom is a prostitute and she's working all night and she doesn't allow him in the house because that's where she's working. And it just broke my heart. And I was what do I do in this situation? Like, how can I help this child, right? And so there's so many different societal factors that are playing into the situation. Whereas we can't just say, yeah, just get an education and you're gonna free yourself from all of this. Society has to change, right? The social fabric shouldn't be that the poor mom, her only option is to become a prostitute to help support her family, right? The government should be taking care of this family, so that way this mom doesn't have to resort to this and the kid doesn't have to be locked out of the house and not sleeping and not eating. And so it was difficult. It was really difficult those first 2 years, like just realizing that.
Thank you. So you briefly mentioned how governments should do and how to reduce poverty, but in detail, what actions can governments and organizations and society in general take to help reduce poverty in their society or in other communities?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I think just having a good social services is so important. And so one of the things, again, I'm always going to tell you kind of from an educational lens because that's my background. One of the things they find is that by having not mandatory, but free childcare starting at 3 years old, so like a preschool for 3 year olds, dramatically impacts poverty, right? And so just allowing those kids from a young age to go ahead and start going to school where they're going to get access to food. A lot of schools have like medical facilities, so they have like a dentist or a doctor, so the kids have access to that. They start learning to read and numbers, numeracy at the same time as like the more privileged peers. And so it helps to reduce that gap. And so trying to get kids access to schooling early on. But also things like in America, it's ridiculous. Like our healthcare system is a hot mess. And so they don't have access. Like I would have kids that desperately need glasses and they can't afford to go to the doctor to get their eyes checked, right? And so providing these services like a dental care, eye care, health care, the government should provide these services, to its people. And then from the food aspect, the issue in America that we face is that you have such easy access, like to the communities where I was working. You could find McDonald's and KFC and fried chicken like this. Okay, it's like every corner there was in the liquor store. Okay, so the store that sells alcohol, like those things, you can find 10 of them in 5 minutes, and you could not find a grocery store that sold fresh fruits and vegetables. And so in America, they always argue like, why is it that in communities of poverty they don't have access to these healthy foods, but they can easily get access to like lottery tickets and alcohol. And so the government should put those regulations in place and help ensure that these communities do have access to healthy foods. Remove as much as possible the liquor stores and the drugs and that type of thing, and that easy access from the community can also, I think, be like a powerful move as well.
Yes. Okay. So talking about how poverty affected communities, uh, I wanted to ask about your perspective from a teacher's perspective. We know that poverty affects the family in general and the children of the family. Uh, it affects them from a side there they struggle with food, they struggle with education, they struggle with clothes on their back, they struggle with a roof on their head. But I wanted to ask, from your point of view, how does it affect the child mentally and emotionally to a psychological level?
Yeah, that's see again. So that's one of the things that I had to come to the realization is that for me as a like a I don't know upper middle class family where both my parents are from university educated, come from a stable background, I never had to worry about is there going to be food on the table. When you go to school, you're worried about like, am I gonna do well? Are my grades gonna be, good? Are the other kids gonna like me? Am I gonna have friends, right? So those are the things on my mind when I go into school. uh, when I started to work with students coming from these impoverished communities, I was like, they're the same, right? And then I realized, no, that's not the case. And my first year teaching, I taught in a high school, okay? And I had this one class, and they were so difficult. They were a very challenging class. And I had this one student who was brilliant. Like he was so smart, mashallah. He knew it was world history. He like knew it better than I did. Okay, he could practically teach the class. And I always, was thinking about like what are these kids' lives like? Like I don't know, right? I don't live in their neighborhoods. I don't know what's going on. And then one day he didn't show up to school. Okay, and all the kids in the class, they used to call me Miss B, Miss B, Miss B, Miss B, so and so. He got arrested. It's like, what do you mean he got arrested? What happened? And so they told me that and again, these are like 16, 17-year-old kids. Okay, so they're very young. He had gotten his girlfriend pregnant. Okay, and she's about to give birth to a baby, but he has no money to help support. So he went to like the gas station and he used a gun and he did armed robbery to get like Pampers and wipes and this kind of thing. And so because he used a gun, it's armed robbery, his minimum sentence is going to be like 15, 20 years. And I just remember crying. Like I remember hearing the story and just breaking down because I was like, why was it that that's his only option, right? Like how can America fail a kid like that? Like a kid that's so young. He was so brilliant. Like mashallah, he was a really smart kid. And I was like, he has such a bright future ahead of him. And that is what was his only option. And really, he felt like that's his only option is armed robbery in order to like help take care of my child, right? And so that was my first realization that, oh my God, like these kids have real issues. Like they're coming to school with like legit safety concerns. Like they're worried about like, am I gonna go home today and someone is gonna like kill me, right? I'm gonna go home today, am I gonna have food to eat? Am I gonna find my parents when I go home? Like I had a lot of students that are not documented, so they don't have like papers. And so is ICE gonna, kidnap my parents? Was always like a concern. And so I then started to just have so much more empathy for the students and realizing, yeah, they're not worried about the same things that I was worried about as a kid. Um, I worked in New York for a little bit, and I remember Halloween was always such a big deal in North Carolina. We're like, oh, you're gonna go dress up, and it's gonna be so fun. So I remember asking my students, I was like, are you guys excited for Halloween? And they were all terrified. Like they came to school that day, it was Friday, and they're terrified. I'm like, guys, what's wrong? Like, what's going on? And they're like, Miss, like, Halloween is not a celebration for us. Halloween is when all the gangs go to war with each other on Halloween. So we literally after school we run home and we lock ourselves up, like because we're too scared to go out because we might get shot. And I was like, oh my God, like that's crazy. Like that's crazy. That's like a sixth, seventh graders issue is like worried about safety and not getting shot in the street. Like they should be kids dressing up and going trick or treating, right? And so again, I think working in public schools in America just made me realize that there's such a huge gap between the people of America, like the ones that you see on TV, and the reality of like what it is to grow up in America, and especially to grow up with poverty and so much violence around you.
Yeah, it's deep, and these, like you said, these kids have a lot of responsibilities very early in their life, a lot of psychological pressure very early in their life, and they don't get to live out their childhood. And uh, as a person that's lived out his childhood and learned from his childhood, I feel like it's the perfect uh, developing steps into my adulthood life.
Yes.
So how we've established what they're thinking about and what they use their time doing, but how does losing their childhood in poverty affect their adulthood? So I want to ask about if you've had any experience with adults in poverty, either their parents, the students' parents, or family members. How is life in poverty as an adult?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Um, for the parents, I think what's so difficult is that they're always trying to, like, when you live in poverty, you're trying to figure out ways to escape this, right? You're like thinking about, okay, how can I at least make my kids be a level up from where I was, right? How can I get them access to things that I didn't have access to? And so for a lot of the parents, education was the key, right? They're like, I want my kids to be educated because I know if they get educated, they can at least hopefully remove themselves from this cycle of poverty. But what was so unfortunate is what I found with these parents is they just work all the time. Like they're working two, three, like they are hustlers. And so it was so sad to see that because if your parent is working 24/7, they're not really parenting you. And you said it so well. Like they're almost like raising themselves. So they're cooking, they're cleaning, they're taking care of their siblings. And for a lot of my students, when I worked in high school, they all have jobs, right? So they leave school and they go work at McDonald's, right? That was like the most popular place to work, and so they're taking on so many of these responsibilities, and then their parents are also just working nonstop, like to help support in whatever way they can. And so the issue there is that the parents aren't there to help support them, right? And so it's like it's so difficult. It's like this rat race where you're trying to escape this cycle, but it just keeps continuing because you're not there. Like as a parent, in order to escape this poverty, you would need to be helping your kid with studies, right? Ideally, your kid wouldn't have to work, right? They wouldn't have to go to McDonald's. Instead, they could come home from school and they could actually do their homework. They could study. They could do well in school. But that's not the case, right? Because there's so many other factors in play. And so it was frustrating, and honestly the ones that were able to escape it were very few that had the luxury to study and then go off and go to university and then get jobs. But still, what we forget is that coming from a certain socioeconomic status, you have this cultural knowledge that helps you. Okay, so let's say, for example, you're the first generation university. You don't even know anything about university. You have no one in your family who's gone to university. You don't have someone to help guide you through it, right? So for me, like both my parents went to university, my sisters went to university. So when I show up, I already know everything, right? I know how to succeed. I know how to make connections. I know how to do well. And for students coming from these impoverished communities, they don't have that cultural capital. So they show up at university and they don't know anything, right? This is a whole new world for them. They don't have that access that we had. And so again, it's so unfortunate because even though that message is like, just get to university and you'll succeed, that's not the case, right? There's so many other factors that go into play in order to help you to escape that system. And so the university started to do that. They started to like have special programs for first generation students to help support them and give them that cultural knowledge, that cultural capital that they need. But I would say we're still so far away from that equity, right? That equal balance, and really honestly providing ways for people to get out of poverty. I don't think really exist.
Yeah. Uh, so world is taking steps towards trying to end poverty, but again, a lot of people believe in the term ignorance is bliss. They'll ignore the poverty and or even blame it on themselves. Blame it on the
Yes.
people in poverty. They'll say, "Oh, it's their fault. They didn't work hard enough. It's their fault."
Yes.
So
100%.
people who use the term ignorance and bliss in this situation, what do you have to say to them?
Such a good one. Because we, in America, a lot of times what they tell us is it's a meritocracy. And so what that means is like, if you just work hard enough, anybody can succeed, right? And they always give you these stories like, oh, look at Steve Jobs, or look at, like, they'll give you like that one in a million or billion person that was successful that came out of poverty. And so I say, like, you need to look at the systems in place that are discriminatory, that those barriers that prevent people from escaping from poverty. And it's so clear, like you can see it right in front of you, you know. um just in like wage disparity, like how much someone is paid. Like if you look in America, like the CEO, how much the CEO is paid, and then their, like, you know, entry level job, it's like a million percent difference. Like that's insane, which you don't find in Europe. Like in Europe, you won't find that huge discrepancy between the lowest paid and the highest paid. And so it's unfortunate because a lot of people just don't understand what that means, right? They don't know what it means to live in that situation where it's like paycheck to paycheck. You're working 80 hours, right, a week. It's not that you're not working hard enough, you are, but because your wages are so low and you don't have any of the benefits, it's so difficult for you to escape that. And so I would say it's not how hard you work, right? There's no correlation. Like they work really hard. Like if you see construction workers, like they're working extremely hard, like harder than any of us. But because the wage is so low, no matter how hard they work, they're never going to be able to escape that. And so it's difficult, but just being able to like put yourself in that person's shoes and understand that it's not, it has nothing to do with, you know, how hard they work, but rather it's almost like the circumstances that they're born into that they didn't choose, right? They didn't choose to be born into this situation. And thinking about like, regardless of the effort that you put in, you still may not succeed because there's so many other societal factors going against you.
Yeah. So we've discussed everything, I think. Just one final question. We've mainly focused on the struggle of poverty, people struggling in poverty, different societies in poverty, the effects of poverty to people in poverty and outside of poverty. Last thing I wanted to is a comparison between the two sides of the world. So we've discussed how poverty in America is located and how the government and the system is allocated to them. Um, in Dubai or in the UAE, there isn't as much poverty as there is. Poverty has a different label or a different level. What makes the difference between these two countries?
Ooh, that's such a good question. Well, UAE, first of all, like as far as like their citizens are concerned, they take really good care of them. So they have access to free, really good quality healthcare, dental, eyes. I think when they get married, they get the plot of land from the government in order to help build their homes. There's so many programs for UAE citizens to ensure that they're not living in poverty. And so, again, that's what I was talking about. Those social services are so important. Public education, like they have a really good public education where Emiratis can send their kids to school and get a really good quality education. And so I think that's a big difference, right? For the UAE citizen, that the government has truly, honestly built these systems for them. The UAE is also, I would argue, again, I don't have any data on this, but I would argue just from my own anecdotal evidence that it's also a place for immigrants. If you're thinking about labor, so like construction workers, nannies, people that are coming in low skilled. I don't know why they call it low skilled, but they're probably high skilled, but they're working in these jobs that don't require higher education. What I've noticed just anecdotally is that They come to the UAE alone, right? Not with their families. And then what they're doing is they're sending remittances home. So let's say it's the nanny sending money home to the Philippines, okay? And so from my many conversations, or the nail technician, the hairdresser, all of those service industry people, the lady working in Zara, when I talk to them, what they tell me is that they themselves probably would be living in poverty, if that makes sense, in Dubai, right? So they're probably in a shared apartment with like five other ladies. But what they're doing is they're sending almost all of their money back home. And so when I talk to them, okay, what's happening back home? They have built a house for their family back home. They're sending their children to private school back home. And so they themselves are living maybe like more of an impoverished life, right? Where they're working very long hours and their living conditions are not the best. But there's that hope of like their children will no longer live in poverty. And I think that's so powerful to see that. I have a nanny, she's from Ethiopia. And she's always like so proud of the home that she built in Ethiopia. And she shows me like, when she's FaceTiming with her mom or Zoom with her mom, show her the house that I built. And she's like taking me around the house. Like her mom needed surgery. She paid for her mom to get surgery. She brought her brother a car. And so just seeing that, like, even though like her life is, I mean, it's not tough because she lives, she lives with me. So alhamdulillah, I mean, it's like she's living a good life, but still, I mean, like at the end of the day, she's a nanny, right? And her salary is not the highest salary, but she's able to, because she lives with us, she is able to send all her money home. And honestly, she really is she has lifted her family out of poverty. And I think that's so powerful to see that. And so I know a lot of people criticize us and like, oh, slave labor and la 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 la. But I'm like, when you look at it, for the salaries that they get paid back home in their country, it's a lot of money and it goes a really long way. And so I've always been so impressed by that, by talking to different people and asking them, what about your kids? They're like, yeah, I'm sending my kids to private school. Now my kid is a lawyer back home. My kid is a teacher back home. And so hearing these stories always just make me so happy to see that it is possible. Our lifeguard is from Bangladesh, and he was telling us how his dad has been a farmer his whole life, and from working in Dubai, he bought the farmland for his dad, and then he left and he went back to Bangladesh to be a farmer. He's like, I saved enough money working here for 5 years. Now I'm going home and I own the land, and now I get to work with my dad and continue farming. Whereas if he stayed in Bangladesh, there's no way he would have never been able to escape that cycle of poverty. And so I think the UAE really does provide these opportunities to so many millions of people around the world in so many different countries to help them escape that cycle of poverty.
Yeah. So perspective is a huge impact, and the way to look at poverty and the way currency also is a big difference between these countries.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your time to with speaking with us today. Your insights were like truly eye-opening, and it means a lot for this documentary. We really appreciate your sharing your knowledge and experience with us.
Thank you, Hamza. I really enjoyed our conversation. And again, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. Take care.
Bye.